So the world's attention has quite rightly been focused on the late Queen. It's a momentous turning point in our history, in world history. But while our eyes have been temporarily averted, something extraordinary has been happening in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are defying the odds again. And before we talk more about Her Majesty or anything else, I just want to pay tribute to these Ukrainians, because while we mourn our late Queen, Ukrainians are mourning their fathers, brothers, sisters and daughters every single day. As we come together to remember what makes our country great, Ukrainians are fighting and dying just to make sure their country still exists next year. Thousands of Ukrainians have been liberated this week in a massive sucker punch counterattack in the south and the east. It's been quite remarkable. Many said it couldn't be done. The Ukraine just didn't have the numbers, but in tanks from trenches, with brute force and unimaginable bravery, the Russian flag has been torn down. Ukraine has taken back more than 2,000 square miles of its country. This is the biggest turning point in the war since Putin's invaders were battered away from Kyiv at the very start. And make no mistake, it's not the end, nowhere near, but it does show yet again what remarkably resilient people these Ukrainians are. And it's crucial they can build up from a position of this new strength. So now more than ever, even though our thoughts are rightly here and our late great Queen, we should remember we must continue to back Ukraine. We must give President Zelensky what he needs. The late Queen's coffin was carried to London today on the same RAF plane that's been used to deliver British weapons and British aid to Ukraine. Two very different services of duty, but both, I think, equally important. Joining me now to discuss the latest in Ukraine is former US Secretary of Defense under President Trump, Mark Esper, and Chair of the House of Commons Defense Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood. And here's my pack, brilliant pack, Emily and Adam, from earlier. So thank you for rejoining me. Tobias Ellwood, before we get to this, I just want to ask you, on the back of that last debate, this issue of Prince Harry and Andrew and whether they should be allowed to wear military uniforms during this week of events in memory of the Queen. What's your view of this?
I don't have a strong view on that. My focus is on the transition and making sure that we give the King all the support is provided. Some big decisions need to be made leadership-wise on Britain's place in the world. We have a new Prime Minister, a new King. There's an absence of leadership on the international stage. It's not really coming from America. We've been hesitant, a little bit risk-averse across the West now. I just want to focus on making sure that we invest in our armed forces. And as you rightly point out, do not forget what is going on in Ukraine, because it's moved into a very, very dangerous chapter. You're absolutely right to congratulate the Ukrainian forces. Putin made a calculation that he thought the nation would collapse when he invaded. He was absolutely wrong there, but he was right on assuming that the West would sit on his hands, that the West would not want to get directly involved. We've left Ukraine to do the fighting. And now that there's been this massive surge, incredible advance, a counterattack by the Ukrainians, we must not kid ourselves that somehow Putin is defeated. This is his worst setback as a president, politically and militarily. I suspect he's going to come out fighting, and it could get very, very ugly indeed.
All right, Dr. Mark Esper, I mean, there's no doubt it could, but there's also no doubt that what has been happening in the last 2 or 3 days in Ukraine is quite extraordinary.
No, that's right. And first of all, let me echo your comments about the Ukrainians. They have showed great skill and courage and grit in fighting the Russians, and on the front lines of what I think is the autocracies versus democracies of the 21st century. So I think they've done an outstanding job. But you're right, the turnaround has been remarkable. They've shown great prowess on the battlefield. And look, Putin his military has shown extreme weaknesses from top to bottom, and it's been a great strategic failure on a number of counts. The question is, does he have any manpower and material left to really push back hard against the Ukrainians, because they continue to deplete Russian combat capability.
Right. I mean, Tobias Ellwood, just in some news here, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky says 6,000 square kilometres of territory have now been seized back from Russian occupied forces. That's a huge amount of territory that they've regained. And I've seen several maps of that whole southeast region, the Donbass, and you can just see great swathes of Ukrainian territory being taken back and Russians in apparent retreat. So they've got to, if they are going to retaliate in the way that you fear, they've got to get on with it, haven't they?
Yes. Well, firstly, it's a pleasure to share a platform with my friend Mark. You're absolutely right to say, how would this retaliation take place? This is a textbook deception, almost like the D-Day landings when we were pretending to go to Calais, ended up in Normandy, and the Nazis had moved troops from Normandy up to Calais. You know, President Zelensky said he was going to Kherson, down east of Odessa, ends up in the north near Kharkiv, and pushed through 30 miles in, coming close to the Russian border. The supply chains have collapsed. The Russian morale is depleted. Poor equipment, as we've been discussing, ammunition's running low and so forth. But I make it very, very clear, Putin is in this for the long game. This is part of a wider strategy that we must get our heads around. We've moved into a new era of insecurity. So what happens in Ukraine today, this month, indeed this year, is actually part of a wider tapestry of events that I think are going to unfold in front of us. He's meeting President Xi next week once again. His key ally on the international stage here, no doubt will ask him for support as well. Putin, this is his war of choice. He can't afford to lose it, and he's going to come out fighting.
Dr. Esper, final word to you on this. Do you think the Ukrainians can win this war? And can they win it quite quickly, given what has been going on?
I absolutely think they can win this war. It won't be done quickly. You know, they have great momentum right now, but they have to be careful not to outrun their logistics and their ability to secure their lines of communication. At some point, the Russians will stop and dig in and defend. But the broader strategic issues are there, as was just outlined. You know, Putin is going to reach out to Xi Jinping, his strategic partner. You see some rumblings today in Armenia, where the Azerbaijanis are pushing against Russian partners. Maybe we'll see something happen in Georgia, where there's another frozen conflict. There's a much bigger geostrategic play here going on.
Got to leave it there. Dr. Esper and Tobias Ellwood, thank you both very much indeed. Appreciate it.